is Janel Curry. I'm the president of the American Scientific Affiliation, and I want to welcome the members of the public that have joined us on this plenary at our annual meeting. And I'll take a few minutes to just introduce you to the ASA. The ASA was founded in 1941, so this is our 78th annual meeting. The American Scientific Affiliation is an international, scholarly, and professional society of Christians engaged at the interfaith of faith and science questions. So our goal is really to empower our members in their vocations and their callings from God so that they can better be of service to society, to science, the church, and to each other. And at the ASA, we do this through promoting scholarship, through this annual meeting, through local chapters, discussions online, materials, and a peer-reviewed publication called Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, and an online magazine called God and Nature. We also do professional development with our members through our Career Center and early scholars or early career opportunities for growth. And then finally, we provide fellowship and community through worship, networking opportunities, and holding each other in prayer. So if you are new to hearing about the ASA, please check out the website, and I'm sure that there'll be some information up there to tell you where to go to find out more. So we're glad to have you with us this evening. And now I want to turn it over to Mike Beidler, who is the chair of the ASA board, co-chair of the program committee for this conference, and if that was not enough, he's the president of the local DC chapter, and he's going to be our moderator this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Janel said, I'm Mike Beidler, chair of the board, program co-chair of this weekend's annual meeting of the ASA, and as an organization dedicated to the exploration of the intersection of science and the Christian faith, it is the ASA's honor to introduce to you this evening Dr. Francis Collins, arguably our organization's most esteemed member. Francis was born about 3 hours west of here in Stanton, Virginia, raised in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley. He received his BS in chemistry at the University of Virginia and then went on to receive his Master of Science and PhD in physical chemistry at Yale. And keep in mind that at this point in his life, Francis was an atheist. And changing fields soon thereafter, Francis attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And it was there that Francis not only received his MD, but also his identity as a child of God, with the posthumous assistance of one C.S. Lewis. After his residency, he returned to Yale as a fellow in human genetics, and in the mid-'80s, became a professor of internal medicine and human genomics at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. And last year, Francis and I worked out that we were at Michigan together in the late 80s, when I was studying for my undergraduate degree in political science. And we both left U of M at about the same time. I became a naval aviator, but Francis had his sights set on something a lot higher than I could fly. He became director of the National Center for Human Genome Research, which featured an international team that successfully carried out the Human Genome Project and produced the first finished sequence of human DNA in 2003. And it blows my mind that that is more than 20 years ago. It was during this period of his life that Francis sought to communicate with others how he harmonized his Christian faith with science. And in 2006, he published The Language of God, A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. This related his journey from atheism to Christianity and showed more than 13 million readers worldwide, including me. Thank you. That modern science can actually enhance our faith rather than be in conflict with it. A year later, Francis founded the BioLogos Foundation as a means by which he could continue that public conversation sparked by his book. And in 2009, BioLogos launched its now famous website, which received more than 3 million unique page views in 2022. 3 million unique page views. But as Proverbs 16:9 says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. And in October of that same year, Francis resigned as president of BioLogos to answer then President Obama's call to serve as the 16th director of the National Institutes of Health, which is the world's largest supporter of biomedical research. He served in this capacity working for not one, not two, but 3 presidential administrations, a testimony to his integrity and his leadership skills. But he resigned from the directorship in December 2021. I'm sure you were tired. And over the course of his career, Francis has been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the National Medal of Science, and most recently in 2020, and I watched this live on the internet, the Templeton Prize. Finally, Francis has a new book coming out, The Road to Wisdom, on truth, science, faith, and trust, and that's going to come out this September. And I have a feeling you're going to get a really good preview of this book's contents tonight. So, without further ado, I'm going to get off the stage and bring Francis Collins up.
Wow, Mike, thank you for an incredibly generous introduction. And what a joy it is to be here at ASA tonight with all of you. I've been soaking up conversations with students and some of the presentations, and certainly had the privilege of being here last night to listen to my former postdoctoral fellow, Praveen Sethupathi, give one of the most amazing presentations on diversity that I've ever heard in my life. And I hope you are also able to soak up that remarkable presentation. If you looked at your program, if you have one, you'll see there are a few people who have been members for more than 40 years. That would include me. Shortly after I became a Christian and looking out for some other way to find out other scientists who are sharing that same worldview, ASA emerged as something that I might be able to learn from. And I remember particularly going to a meeting, I think it was in Boston. I was at the time not in Boston, but I made the trip there to try to meet with people who would share the same views about how science and faith were actually complementary. And it was incredibly inspiring and encouraging. And I've been a huge fan of ASA ever since. And it is certainly wonderful to see the way in which this organization is flourishing at the present time with remarkable leadership of those that you have heard from already. So much reasons to be here to celebrate, even as it also is a time to look at our current circumstances and have some concerns about where our country is going, where our culture is going, where our society is going. So I did want to start off with just a brief bit of my own background, because I think people are always curious to know, how did you end up becoming a scientist who also is a follower of Jesus? And you already heard from Mike's introduction that that's not the way I started out. I didn't grow up in a family where faith was considered important. It wasn't denigrated, it just wasn't considered important. And so in college, I didn't really find any reason in those discussions late at night in the dorm to align myself in any particular way with the believers versus the non-believers. And by the time I was a graduate student studying physical chemistry, I really had moved very much into a pure materialistic perspective that if you couldn't measure it scientifically, then it wasn't any point in talking about it and it didn't exist. But then I went to medical school. And certainly in the medical school experience, starting out as an atheist, I began to realize there were some pretty serious questions about life and death and suffering that I hadn't really had to face up to before. And I didn't find that I had many answers to that and tried not to think too deeply about it. But then, as a third-year medical student at the University of North Carolina, one is put out there in the circumstance of having the chance to sit at the bedside of patients who look at you as their doctor, even though you're still in training. And many of those patients were good, honorable people whose lives were very much threatened by terrible diseases, maybe cancer, maybe heart disease. And we didn't have a whole lot that we could really offer them that was going to rescue them from what otherwise seemed like a fairly downhill, dark circumstance. But the people with faith were very different in their approach to this. And I was curious about that. I figured that's a really powerful psychological crutch, but I wondered how it worked. And then I had the experience one afternoon as I was sitting at the bedside of an elderly woman with really terrible heart disease who had excruciating episodes of pain every day or so. And after getting through that painful experience, she shared with me that her faith saw her through that, even though she recognized our medical support system was not really doing much to help her. And she turned to me and asked me straight out, "I've shared my faith with you, doctor. What do you believe?" Ask somebody you know that question sometime when they haven't really aligned themselves in a way that you're aware of and see what happens. Probably the most important question I was ever asked in my life. That experience as a medical student caused me to realize I'd never paid really much attention to this question about belief, just kind of adopted the view of being an atheist because maybe it was the answer I wanted, because then I didn't have to be responsible to anyone other than myself and a few other people. And it caused me to then begin a search through the lives and the writings of people who were believers to try to understand how they could come to that conclusion and not sacrifice their intelligence, because I assumed that would have to be involved. And of course, I found out quite the opposite. C.S. Lewis, as mentioned, was a big part of my education. But so was the writings of a bunch of other thoughtful people and some advisors around me in medical school who were believers and told me how they had put all of this together in wonderful ways. It took 2 years. I did a fair amount of searching through other kinds of writings about different world religions. And I was resisting this. I thought my goal here was to strengthen my atheism, and that was not working. And ultimately, after those 2 years, found I could no longer resist the call to come and follow Jesus, that this was the answer to all of the questions I had had about what's the nature of good and evil? Is there a God? Does God care about me? And in my 27th year, I became a follower of Jesus. Now, many people predicted my head would explode the next day because by then I was already interested in the science of genetics and how you could put that together with medicine. But I can tell you that never in that now 47 years since then have I encountered circumstances where there is not a reasonable path forward to understand how God's two books, the book of God's words, the Bible, and the book of God's works, nature, can be in fact harmonious. And BioLogos, which I had the privilege of founding now back in 2009, is flourishing as a place for lots of people to come and have those discussions. And I'm thrilled now to be a senior fellow there and to be here today with the president of BioLogos, Deb Harsma, who you heard from last night. So the topic tonight is more to turn the clock forward to the present time. Come, let us reason together. I am deeply troubled by the state of our nation and our world, where truth, science, faith, and trust, all of which are things which our society, our culture, our faith all depend upon, seem to have fallen into a circumstance of uncertainty, leading to circumstances that I think in the long run, and even in the short run, are potentially quite harmful to us as a people, as a nation, and as followers of Jesus. Where does this "come, let us reason together" come from? It's Isaiah. The verse before it is a good one too for our current circumstance. Learn to do well. Seek judgment. Relieve the oppressed. Judge the fatherless. Plead for the widow. Come now and let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. Sort of standing here right now, imagining my 25-year-old self giving that kind of a presentation and talking to you about sins being scarlet when I was an atheist. That would have been a little hard stretch there, but now it makes the most complete sense for the realization of who we are. But all of that got changed by this, what do you believe, doctor? And along with that, the realization that we are called as believers to love the Lord with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our mind. If you look back to Deuteronomy, which Jesus seemed to be quoting, the mind part doesn't get mentioned. Jesus adds that as something we were supposed to notice. I think that's what ASA is all about. We are here to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind. And also, I think, to appreciate the beauty of the creation that we have been granted. I love this comparison visually of the rose window from York Minster Cathedral and a view of DNA down the long axis, not the way you usually look at it, but showing its incredibly beautiful radial design. All of you who are scientists, no doubt, are asked sometimes by non-scientists or non-believers, doesn't science kind of take the awe out of everything? It's kind of, because you know about Rayleigh scattering, then the sunset isn't really that beautiful anymore. Not at all. It's better and better. It's even more awesome because you understand how God put this all together to create beauty that we get to enjoy every day. In that experience, in Polkinghorne's words, which I love very much, can't be dismissed as just epiphenomenal froth on the surface of an uncaring universe. Beauty is much more than that. Whether it's the beauty of a view of a biological structure like DNA, whether it's the beauty of a mathematical equation, which is so perfect, so exquisite in the way in which it describes how matter and energy works, or whether it's other things we see looking out into the galaxies that are so stunning, especially now as we get even more beautiful images all the time with the new telescopes. So yes, as mentioned, I wrote about all this in the language of God, and that led to a lot of interest, which then led to the founding of BioLogos. But tonight, I want to talk about this topic, America divided. I've only been alive for 74 years, so I can't say this is like the worst circumstance that has happened. And I certainly wasn't alive in the 1850s and early 60s when our country was coming apart in the Civil War. But to most people who've been around a while, and historians who write about these things, we are at a particularly troubling space of divisions, of polarization, of moving off into separate camps or separate bubbles, and seeing people who are not with us as not just misguided, but potentially dangerous and evil. This can't be a good thing for the future of our nation or our world, and it's particularly prominent in America, but it's certainly happening in other parts of the world as well. Well, is it really that bad? Is it just that we keep hearing from the extreme voices how bad it is? But what's really going on with our society? There's a wonderful group called More in Common, started in the UK, but is now very much prominent in the US as well. And they did this very detailed survey of American political views and basically divide us up into 7 categories, as you can see here. And what is certainly the case, and this won't surprise you, is that the wings, the left and right extreme voices, are certainly there, but they're not there in huge numbers, but they certainly get an undue amount of the airtime and the attention. And their estimate is, and they coined this term, the exhausted majority, is that about 2/3 of us are in that space. We're maybe a little bit red or a little bit blue, but we're not aligned with these perspectives that seem to be sending a message that we're at each other's throats. By the way, the people at the extremes also have very extreme views about everybody else. They assume that if you're not in their category, that you are much more extreme in the other direction than you really are. So that's an issue, but it also is maybe a source of a little bit of hope. If there are 2/3 of us that are in this exhausted majority, we are exhausted, and maybe a lot of us have kind of checked out, just hoping this will go away, or hoping somebody else will solve it. I want to come back to that and say, maybe we can solve it. Maybe this is actually an opportunity, not to just say, we shouldn't be like this, but to say, I shouldn't be like this. Let me try to help. I want to try to make the case. But first I have to make the diagnosis before I can get to any kind of suggestion about a treatment. Many of our traditional anchors that we've taken for granted as a society over centuries seem to be threatened. Truth. Is there really such a thing anymore? Aren't we postmodern now? When is it okay to say, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me? If it's whether the earth goes around the sun, I'm sorry, that's not okay to say. But there are people, the flat earthers, and that's thousands of people, who don't accept that. It doesn't mesh with their experience or what they want the answer to be. Science gets caught up in this. Science is the way we discover truth about nature, but there's certainly plenty of people who don't believe it as much as they used to. Trust in science has taken a significant downward turn, especially in the last 5 years. Doesn't science make a lot of mistakes? Aren't the scientists biased anyway? Aren't they all elitist atheists? Faith, you would think, would be a source of wisdom and truth at a time like this. Christian faith is supposed to be about love and truth. How's that going? I can tell you in my email, sometimes not so well. The most really horrendous emails I get are from Christians who are upset about something I've said, maybe about public health, and are therefore telling me that I am actually doomed and I must not really be a Christian, because otherwise I couldn't possibly have taken a view that they don't agree with. And then this all ties into trust. Because if we don't figure out who to trust and place that trust wisely, then it's going to be very hard to climb out of our current polarized situation. Why is that slipping right now? And it is. I'll show you the data. So let's take each one of these one at a time and dig a little deeper into what the actual basis is. And I should declare right up front, I never took a single course in philosophy in my entire life. And I'm about to talk to you about the nature of truth. So you should be very careful here about whether this is something to pay attention to. But it is, after all, truth has to have some connection to reality. And there has to be clarity about the evidence for a claim. I like to think of concentric circles here, drawn by my granddaughter, who happens to be a graphic artist at Michigan. That truth is not all the same, because there are levels. Let me walk you through the levels. So the central circle here, necessary truth, what is that? This is something that would have to be true in any universe, not even just ours. 2 + 2 is going to be 4. The area of a circle, let's neglect relativity for just a minute, please, all you smarty physicists. The area of a circle is πr². Pythagoras, without too much worrying about those fine points of what happens in relativistic circumstances, a² + b² = c². You can't imagine mathematics just being dependent on our universe. It is what it is. That's necessary truth. It's a small collection of data, but the kid who just flunked the math test can't say, well, it's just because those equations weren't true for me. Maybe some have tried, but I don't think that's going to win it. So then the next circle, which is a really important one, which Jonathan Rauch in his wonderful book called The Constitution of Knowledge writes a lot about. These are firmly established facts that we as a society, based on evidence, have concluded are true. The earth goes around the sun. The AIDS virus is the cause of HIV. Some of these things are history. Yes, 1066 really happened. Yes, the World Trade Towers were brought down by planes on 9/11. There are people who don't believe that, by the way. Yes, a man walked on the moon on July 20th, 1969. Those are established facts. And when people start to erode those, you should be very worried about that. The next circle out is the one that is more uncertain, where there are things there that we might ultimately move into the circle of established facts, but we don't quite have enough evidence yet. There's life on other planets. Did you see that report from the Mars rock that got looked at a day or so ago that had some properties that look like maybe that could be a living material or at least organic something or other? yeah, okay, I'm interested. I'm even more interested in exoplanets, and I expect we're going to find out more and more about their atmospheres. So maybe that uncertainty zone will move into the direction of saying, yes, there is life on other planets, but it's not there yet. So it belongs in that space, as do a lot of other things that we discuss about. I don't know whether dark matter is real, and if so, what it looks like, but it's probably important, because otherwise the whole universe doesn't make sense. Those kinds of things. And then you get to that outer circle, which is opinion. Cats make better pets than dogs. I could start a fight right here if somebody tried to promote that idea. The Boston Red Sox are the best baseball team ever. Well, no, I heard one yes, okay, but I heard a lot of no's too. And that's okay. This is not a cause for alarm. We should enjoy the fact that people have different opinions. That makes life interesting. The problem is when you forget which circle you're in and debate whether something is true or not, then really our whole system starts to fall apart. And the biggest mistake you can make is to say none of it's true. And the second biggest mistake you can say is that all of it's true, including my opinions. Very important. Truth does not care about how you feel about it. And we're making that mistake a lot right now. People rejecting a particular true statement coming from evidence-based expertise because it isn't the answer they want. We don't have that luxury. That's not how it works. Now, I used to think it was that simple. It kind of was somebody who went along with this guy, Descartes. I think, therefore I am. We're all rational actors, right? If we're presented with information that's factual and evidence-based, we will all make the right conclusion about whether it's true or not. That ain't the way it's been. It's never been that way. But it's even more obviously not that way in the last couple of years. So yeah, I should have paid more attention to this guy, David Hume. And this is a direct quote. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. He's not just saying it's too bad that reason is a slave to the passions. He's saying it ought only to be. And that's how our brains actually work, that we don't apply reason in the way that we would like to think we do. We figure out first what is our emotional attachment to an issue, and then that will guide what our level of likelihood of acceptance of the claim is likely to be. Now, Hume was an atheist, so I have a little bit more trouble with his perspective, but look at Blaise Pascal, one of my heroes in terms of philosophy and reason and theology. The heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. Doesn't your heart have that too? Mine does, now that I'm willing to admit it. The writer, Jonathan Haidt's, who has recently written, has written a recent book about young people called The Anxious Generation. Has an earlier book that uses the metaphor of the rider and the elephant, which I think is pretty useful, that the rider is reason, the elephant is the emotions. And which direction do you think that's going to take you? The rider thinks he's in charge, but the elephant is actually running the show. One other philosopher I'll introduce you to, who is more recent and less well known and has quite a mouthful of a name, Willard Van Orman Quine, proposed this metaphor that I've gotten very attached to, and I want to try it out on you as a means of trying to understand a little better my own bias, and maybe it will help you think about whether you have some of those too, which is the web of belief. So it is a metaphor. Think of your belief system as in the form of a spider web, and think about what that means in terms of its stability. That kind of a web has lots of threads, but what really matters for it staying together are the nodes where the threads come together, and especially the ones near the middle. So those are going to be the things that you feel really strongly about, and you're going to resist incoming information that disagrees with that node. Whereas things a little further out, like, okay, I could consider that. We all have one of those. You do right now. And you may not be aware, and I wasn't until I thought about it, about what are those nodes in the middle that are going to make me less than objective about information that somebody puts in front of me, because I will say, I don't think that can be true. I'll give you a few of mine. One of my innermost nodes is science is trustworthy. I believe that. If somebody tries to say it's all made up, it's bogus, or give me a postmodern thing that says science is just all a social construct, I'm going to strongly disagree. I suspect you will too. My wife loves me. She's here. I hope she's not going to stand up and say, you might move that one out a little bit. My cat loves me. That's a little further out in the threads there. Does anybody know if your cat loves you? I don't know. Jesus died for me. That's who I am. If somebody tries to tell me, oh, we found his bones, I'm going to be very, very insistent on an incredibly strong set of data. People occasionally do make those claims and they don't hold up. Similarly, the resurrection is true. That is part of my faith. People say, wait a minute, you're a scientist. How can you believe that a man rose from the dead? Yes, I do. Yes, if I don't believe in that, I have no faith at all. If God was the creator who put in place all the natural laws that govern the way the universe works, are you going to tell me God didn't have the power to raise his son from the dead? Come on, you got one, you got the other. I get a little mixed up about some of the theological things, though. All you post-millennials and pre-millennials, I'd love to talk to you, but I really don't quite get it here. So I'm putting that one a little further out. We're going to do a little public health here. Vaccines are safe and effective. I didn't quite put that all the way to the middle because vaccines can have side effects. About 1 out of every 10,000 young men who got that mRNA vaccine got myocarditis. Fortunately, they all got better. But you might say that wasn't particularly a good thing for them. So you've got to be a little balanced there. Public health needs experts. Yeah, but not just experts. Public health needs input from the public. We didn't probably do enough of that during COVID. The CDC is always right? Nope. I love the CDC and I love all the people that work there and lead there, but they will be the first to tell you they make mistakes. Was mandating masks in school essential? I don't know. It was reasonable, but was it essential? It's really hard to find data to back that up one way or the other. Climate change. Yes, it's real. Come on, folks. This is settled science, even though 38% of evangelicals don't accept it. Biden won the 2020 election. Yeah, he really did. 61 court cases brought forward. Only one of them was temporarily sustained, and then on second thought, nope, not that one either. 7 million difference in ballots cast for Biden versus Trump. Can we consider that, please, as settled and move on? Tricky one came up last night. Structural racism. Is it real? I think it is. I think it's actually part of the institution I had the privilege of leading at NIH for 12 years, and I hadn't really thought about it until it was time to think about it and to realize a lot of the structures that we depended upon were still affected, maybe infected by the legacy of 400 years of slavery. So those are some of my webs, my nodes that I need to keep track of when somebody is asking me to listen to a claim. And your web will be different. I'm part of Braver Angels, which is an organization that brings together people on opposite sides of the political spectrum and gets them to talk to each other in open, somewhat intimate ways, so they really have to listen. And I've had an interesting time there asking people to do this experience of putting together their web and see what's in the nodes in different places. And you might then think, well, this is hopeless because we're rather different at this level. But the good news is, I think these webs don't float free in the atmosphere. They have to be attached to something. I think they're attached to the fundamental values that we all still do share. Things like faith, things like family and love and truth and beauty and goodness and freedom. And our webs, those are maybe the 7 pillars that are talked about in Proverbs, although Proverbs never says what they are. The webs are kind of attached to those. And so you can have people with very different ideas of what their web of belief looks like, but they will probably agree about those fundamental values. That's part of the hope I have for us all getting back together. Okay, that was the truth component of this in a very quick, superficial way. How about the science part? By the way, that's a photo of my lab group at the NIH. I run a research lab. Those are some amazing young scientists who are working on things like diabetes and a disorder of premature aging. Incredibly dedicated to the scientific method. Develop hypotheses, test them out with experiment, see if they hold up or not. Yes, science can make mistakes, but it's ultimately self-replicating, and it is a reliable way to discover truth about nature. So how did that apply to COVID-19? And particularly to the effort to develop vaccines that might prevent death from this terrible, worst in a century pandemic. At NIH, within 48 hours of learning about the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus genome, the design was already underway of the first vaccine. It was the one to see at the bottom there, the mRNA approach, because you could do that immediately. All you needed to do was know the letters of the code, and then you could basically produce the synthetic RNA that should result in the production of a spike protein to which your immune system would respond. There are other ways to make vaccines, and all three of those were invested in a dramatic way during Operation Warp Speed during the course of 2020. And there was a lot of discussion about that involving everybody from Tony Fauci, our leader for infectious disease at NIH, the president, and a bunch of other folks. Particularly a shout out there to the woman on the right, that's Kizzmekia Corbett, who was the scientist at the bench who did a lot of the work in those first 2 months that made it possible for this vaccine to get into a human clinical trial in 65 days, much, much faster than it ever happened before. Part of my job was to try to be sure we brought all of the talent together that we could to work on this. Never mind the tradition about, oh, it'll take you 2 years to build a partnership between industry and academia. We didn't have time for that. We built this thing called Active in 2 weeks by convincing the industry leaders, the academic leaders, NIH and FDA, we got to do this together. This is a public health emergency. And that public-private partnership, which I had the privilege of co-leading, did in fact put in place the kind of framework necessary to do rigorous testing of vaccines and therapeutics so you would really know if they worked. And astoundingly, in just 11 months, we had, after the conduct of rigorous double-blind randomized controlled trials involving at least 30,000 patients for each vaccine, the FDA approval for emergency use of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine and the Moderna mRNA vaccine. And I thought, we're going to be okay. 95% efficacy and very few, if any, side effects in the 30,000 people involved in either one of those trials. So the focus then shifted to distribution. Let's get the shots out there into arms. And much of the country and much of the world was rolling up their sleeves and saying, come on, get it to me as fast as you can. These were months without sleep as we tried to come up with every possible way to get obstacles out of the way. And for a while, it seemed to be working. But then you can see sort of April, May, the total vaccine doses, which still had many people to reach, started to taper down and never really quite recovered. And 50 million Americans to this day said no thanks. Good, honorable, upstanding, thoughtful, care for their family Americans had so much other information coming at them that they said, not for me. I could barely believe that this was possible in our highly technological country. I was still in that space of being a Cartesian, I suppose, who thought rational things would win the day. But there was so much other noise coming out from politicians, some of it, from media, from misinformation, from rumors, conspiracies, and maybe from a legacy of people being a bit suspicious about science. What group had the strongest resistance to accepting the COVID-19 vaccines? White evangelicals. That's me. I'm one of them. And just, how could that have happened? So what do we know? The settled science. We know this is a terrible virus before the vaccines got to people. More than 1 million died of COVID-19. And some died after vaccination. It was not 100% protective, but it cut that back dramatically. The vaccines were developed in record time. They were limited side effects and highly effective. And the estimates are 3.1 million people are alive today in the US because of the vaccines. I might be one of them. I don't know. You might be one of them. How would you know? And yet, Kaiser Family Foundation, just looking at all the statistics, the epidemiology, they estimate more than 230,000 people in the United States died unnecessarily between June of 21 and April of 22, when vaccines were freely available. That's 4 times the number of people who died in the Vietnam War. Unnecessarily. Our culture wars killed 230,000 people. So you can't look at that and say, oh, well, we're just having a little disagreement as a country. We're having something really serious if it comes to this point of leading to those kinds of decisions. And it is heartbreaking. Every one of those is a tragic story that did not need to happen. Well, okay, was that an aberration? Are we okay? We're getting over COVID. People really want this in the rearview mirror, although we're having another blip here this summer. Fortunately, not sending as many people to the hospital. But we got another big challenge, don't we? If you haven't seen this curve before, look at it closely. This is not somebody's opinion. This is in that circle of established facts of what is happening to the observed temperature on planet Earth versus what you would have predicted by whatever model you want by natural drivers. And you can see along about 1950, the two curves start to separate. And now the observed goes inexorably upward, although with wiggles in it, which is other things that don't necessarily follow exactly the same trend year after year. But the year after year trend is unmistakable. And you probably heard in the last week, we had the hottest day ever recorded on planet Earth. This, of course, is still, to my amazement, not a topic that everybody agrees to, but this is settled science. The Earth has been warming rapidly. It's not part of a natural cycle. If we were in a natural cycle, it was actually to get slightly cooler. It is associated with a dramatic rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide, which has no other explanation than human activity. And the consequences for the planet, not to be catastrophic about it, but they are potentially severe. But there's something we can do. So as scientists, I think we have to take this on. And I haven't really done much of that until thinking about it in the last couple of years. We got to be part of the solution. And we have to figure out ways not to put this forward in a way that just scares people and causes them to shut down, but to think about what can we all do. And there is, in fact, a lot we can do. And you all talked about that at this meeting. BioLogos has now a huge investment in trying to bring believers together around climate change to see what we could, as the body of Christ, identify as paths forward, taking on our responsibility as stewards of this planet that we've been given by the Creator. I don't have time to go into a lot of what those consequences might be, but I just want to say, if you're a member of ASA and whatever you're working on, you got to think about climate change as part of what we all need to do together to educate, to innovate, to come up with ways to try to particularly bring churches along with us to see this as an opportunity and a responsibility. And then there's the faith part. Truth, science, faith. People who read my book, which goes through this, who aren't believers, may get to that chapter and go, well, I don't need to read this, but I hope they will. Maybe just to try to understand, what are believers talking about? What is all this stuff anyway? But actually, I think it's pretty darn compelling. Faith answers questions that science can't help with. This is what drew me to wanting to become a believer, because I realized I was impoverished in terms of interesting questions if I didn't have this lens to look through. Why is there something instead of nothing? What's the basis of morality? What's our need for beauty all about? Does God exist? Does God care about me? And what happens after I die? Okay, I think everybody would agree those are interesting and important questions, except for the strict atheists who would say, off the table, not interesting. Well, they are interesting. Faith should be an anchor, therefore, in a storm, because we have that kind of transcendental view of things which materialism alone can't help with. And Christians, given the foundation of our faith, should be in the best position, shouldn't we? To advocate against divisiveness, against animosity and all the vitriol and all the grievances, and in favor of love, grace, and truth. That should be our strong point. But when I talk to pastors who try to preach about this, many of them will say, okay, I did my best, and I went straight to the Sermon on the Mount. And then somebody came up to me afterwards and said, Pastor, that might have been fine for Jesus' time, but we're at war right now against the forces of wokeism. And all of the stuff you're saying doesn't apply anymore. Get real. People are thinking that. Even Christians are thinking that. Well, that's not our calling. We're to love our neighbors as ourselves. And further on, to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That part of the Sermon on the Mount that must have scandalized Jesus' hearings when it was first spoken, and it scandalizes us today. But there it is. And the words of Jesus about truth. If you hold to my teaching, you really are my disciples, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. If truth is setting you free, that's not what lies are doing. We're imprisoned by some of the lies that are now so readily accepted. And a warning, and this is a scripture that, Deb Harsma pointed this out to me a couple of years ago, and it really caught me up when I think about what's happening in our culture, and particularly our faith culture. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. Wow. Do you see any of that happening? Do we see it even happening in our faith communities? Yeah, I'm afraid it is happening. So faith communities, I'm arguing, ought to be in the best possible position to be counterforces to all of the divisiveness, but we got a ways to go. And then finally, there's trust. This is scary data when you look at it. This is a survey that Gallup has done every year over the course of 30, 40, 50 years about how much do you trust various kinds of sources. And you will notice that except for the military, which has a green bar because trust has actually gone up a little bit, that all the others, the red bars, have dropped significantly, whether it's organized religion, public schools, organized labor, banks, Supreme Court, presidency, newspapers, big business, and at the bottom of the list, Congress. So what's going on here? Some of this, we should distinguish between earned trust or earned distrust. I mean, where basically something has happened that would cause a reasonable person to say, I don't think I'm going to trust that institution anymore, versus manufactured trust, which is just building up animosity against an institution for political or other reasons. And there's some of both of those in here. So how do we decide who to trust? Have you thought about that? I didn't think about it till I had the chance to give it a little bit of consideration. And I would argue there's like 4 things that consciously or unconsciously we look at when we're trying to decide whether to trust a source. In no particular order. Probably competence is the one that comes to mind first for me. It's like, do they know what they're talking about? Okay, that would be good. But it's not just that. It's also integrity. Is this a source that has a history of being honest and truthful and has not been using this kind of spokesman opportunity to rip people off? And maybe attached to that is also humility. Is this an expert who knows their limits? Or are they suddenly an expert on everything? Is this, a Hollywood star who's now going to tell you how to treat your cancer? But then the one on the lower left is the one that I think has gotten a bit out of control, which is, does this source have aligned values with me? And this is where our polarization into opposite camps or different bubbles kicks in a big way. Think about that. If you are being asked to trust a source that is completely on the opposite side of the political spectrum from you, even though it's somebody with expertise and humility and integrity, are you still going to go, no, not my people, don't have my values? That's a serious way. I think maybe that particular square has ballooned in size in our current circumstance, and it caused us to make bad decisions about who to trust in both directions. We failed to trust people who actually have valuable information, but it's not what we wanted to hear. And then we give our trust too readily to sources, may I say Facebook posts occasionally, that really have no authority, expertise, competence, integrity, or humility, but they resonate with what I want to be true. So I'm going to send that to everybody I know. And we do. Okay, so we got these four things that seem to be in trouble: truth, science, faith, and trust. That's the diagnosis. What are we going to do about it? I guess I'm going to try to suggest a modest, and it is modest, kind of plan of action. But I'm going to say politicians are not going to fix this. They're more polarized than the people are. I don't think the media is going to fix this. They're all over the place. I'm not sure the church leadership is in a position to be able to do as much as they would like to, because they immediately cause ruckus in the congregation if they bring up anything that sounds the least bit divisive. So I think it's up to all of us. The exhausted middle, remember that? That's us. And if we have a chance to do something and we stay quiet, then we're not going to be in a good position to continue to complain about the way it looks. So what can we do? I would say, again, starting off, and particularly this is to Christians, wait a minute, what is your worldview? Is it based on what you just read in some sort of online post that made you mad about some political issue? No. It's about the Bible. It's about your principles as enunciated by none other than Jesus Christ. Anchor that worldview and then try to put things more in that perspective. It's hard to do right now with all of these other forces around us. Work on your radar. And scientists are better at this than lots of people, but we're not perfect either, to try to distinguish facts from fakes. Social media and cable news, not your best friend here. Even though 30% of young people, where do they get their news? TikTok. Is that a good thing? Is there a lot of fact-checking going on there? I don't think so. I want to give you a resource if you haven't seen it. This is a very interesting site that hires a whole bunch of objective people, and I think they really are objective, to try to rank media in two axes here. On the x-axis is political left versus right. And I know this is really hard to read because it's small. On the y-axis is trustworthiness. At the top is information that's been thoroughly fact-checked, organizations that when they make a mistake, they admit it and publish a correction, all the things you'd want to have. At the bottom are people who just make stuff up. Yeah, bottom right would be Alex Jones, if you want to sort of get anchored here. This is a site, which if you can't read it, is adfontemedia.com, Adfonte Media. Sorry, Adfontes with an S, adfontemedia.com. It's very worth looking at. They don't want me to make more slides from it because they're sort of a place that this is their intellectual property, but they'll let you look at it and see where you are. And if the things you're looking at are skewed to one side, and particularly if they're down on the lower corner of one or the other, that's something to pay attention to. Are you really getting balanced information? This is an objective way to assess that. Beyond that, are we in a circumstance now with so much polarization that we're avoiding taking on the conversations with people who don't agree with us? It's just too unpleasant. It's not going to go well. Well, then we're never going to get anywhere. I think this means you got to be ready to do a lot more listening and less shouting. And when somebody is saying something that you profoundly disagree with, you're going to have to really listen and understand and then ask them, tell me about where that came from, as opposed to planning your snappy response, which is what we often are doing at that point, which gets you nowhere. We got to practice this. This is not easy. I'm part of Braver Angels, as I mentioned. This is what they do, and I've learned a lot in 2 years from this group about how to do this. Down the bottom there is a debate I did in front of 750 people at the Braver Angels convention in Gettysburg. Interesting choice of where to meet. My counterpart there is Wilkinson, who runs a trucking company in Minnesota and who is over the moon, frustrated and angry about all of the public health measures that did harm to himself, his business, his family, and can't understand how the government could possibly have made so many mistakes. And we have a vigorous conversation, but I can also tell you we're really good friends. After working through these things, I understand where he's coming from, and he's taught me a lot of stuff I didn't know about what it felt like in the heartland to have recommendations about public health that weren't really a very good fit for that environment, although it might have been a good fit for a big city on the East Coast. So yeah, if you have a chance, by the way, braverangels.org, go and have a look. They've got 100 chapters now all over the country. They're looking for people to join. They will put you in circumstances that will make you a little uncomfortable, but you'll learn a ton about how it is that we got to where we are and what we might do to try to find our way back out. They're not explicitly Christian organization, but they're very tolerant of Christians. And then we got to help the kids. I mentioned Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. If you have not read that, and especially if you have preteens or teenagers, that is a book that really demands your attention in terms of its indictment of social media and all the harms that has done to the mental health of our youngest generation. And something we can do about it as well, and not just shake our heads. And then taking what you might do one-on-one with family and friends, but build it out into a community dialogue. Maybe in your church. There's probably somebody in your church who has a different perspective than you do, and it's like, oh, I think we're not going to talk about those issues. Hey, invite them for coffee. Say, I know you and I are on a different place about this thing. Let's say it's gun control. Can you talk to me about that? I want to understand from your perspective why you and I are in a different place. I really want to know. And then get that started. Build the group a little bit and see if there's a way to start this kind of dialogue that just isn't happening right now. Churches should be a place for this kind of healing. Yes, our politicians are not going to solve the problem, but maybe we could do a better job of electing people who actually have character and vision and positive action instead of performance artists that basically seem much more interested in getting into the next Twitter feed or a social media post or something on cable news than in actually governing, and who really are more concerned about their own image than about what's happening to the country. We got to work harder on this, folks. And then finally, an idea I have, I'm going to try it out on you. Maybe we would be advantaged if instead of waving our hands about these things as good things for somebody to do, considered actually taking personal responsibility. A pledge. We all make pledges at other times. You pledge when you get married. I did. You pledge as a student to follow the rules about the honor code. When I signed up to become the NIH director, I swore an oath to the Constitution. We make those kinds of statements and we mean them. So maybe we could come up with something like this. Let me try this out on you, and then I'm going to ask whether, by a show of hands, it's non-binding, whether you would consider signing such a pledge. Okay, I pledge from this day forward, I will seek to be part of the solution to our society's widespread divisiveness, which is hurting individuals, families, communities, our nation, and our world. Okay, I'm going to be part of the solution. I will actively seek out opportunities to engage in dialogue with those who have different views from mine. By respectful listening, I will strive to understand their perspectives better, to identify our shared deeper values, and to build a bridge across the gap that has divided us. When sifting incoming information, thinking about my web of belief, I will seek to be a wise consumer. Taking into account my own biases, I will carefully assess the plausibility of the claim as well as the integrity, competence, and humility of the source in order to decide whether the information is likely to be trustworthy. And I will resist the temptation to speak about, write about, or share on social media information that claims to be true but is of uncertain validity. I'm not going to be part of the next viral explosion of something that's not true. And finally, and this is right from the Christian foundational spirit, I will bring a generous spirit to all my interpersonal interactions refusing to ascribe evil intentions to others simply because of different political or societal beliefs. I will be slow to take offense. Loving my neighbor will be my goal. Okay, would you sign that? All right, that's looking pretty good. So yeah, come let us reason together then. We've talked about truth, science, faith, and trust. And I think what this all really leads to is the need for all of us to try to seek, as Proverbs would tell you over and over again, to find wisdom. Wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's understanding. It carries with it a moral foundation. It provides the opportunity to make decisions in difficult circumstances where the path isn't clear. It has a fair amount of common sense built into it also. And we're all sort of on a road to try to learn how to practice wisdom, which is the title of this book that has already gotten mentioned and which is coming out in September. But much of what's in the book is an expansion of what I've talked to you all tonight, and that pledge is in there as well at the end. Braver Angels has agreed to post the pledge on their website so that we'll have a chance to keep track of people who have signed it, which I think will be great as a means of an objective organization hosting this. Finally, I would say when it comes to wisdom, one of the first verses that I really got attached to when I was a new Christian trying to figure out how to sort this out was from the book of James. James chapter 1, verse 5. And this is a version of it that was done by my daughter for my 46th birthday. My daughter is quite the artist, although she's also a physician. And I think you know this verse, but boy, does it fit right now. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously and without reproach, and it will be given him. I pray that for myself. I pray that for all of you. I pray that for our world. And then he goes on in chapter 3 to say, what is that wisdom like, by the way? How would you know it when you saw it? It's above. It's first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. I pray especially for that kind of wisdom. Let me finish with a blessing. It's my favorite blessing, which I thought was St. Francis until I actually looked it up, and it's actually much more recent. It's by Sister Ruth Fox at a graduation only about 40 years ago. It's a fourfold blessing, and it's the fourth part that I particularly love. But here we go. And this is for all of you, and for all of us in our hurting world. May God bless you with discomfort and easy answers, half-truths, superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. I pray for that kind of foolishness for ASA, for all of you, for myself, and for our world. Thank you all so much.
So giving a pastoral response to Francis's talk this evening is Dr. Walter Kim. And I first met Walter in 2016. A mutual friend of ours from the State Department invited us out to dinner to get acquainted. He said, "You've got to meet this guy." And at the time, Walter was serving as a pastor of the historic Park Street Church, a wonderful international congregation in downtown Boston. And by the way, Walter, my sixth cousin 5 times removed was Edward Beecher, brother to Uncle Tom's Cabin author Harriet Beecher Stowe, who served as pastor at Park Street Church from 1826 to 1830. Our dinner conversation that evening turned, as expected, to the intersection of science and faith, and I was extremely impressed with Walter. And it's not every day you meet a pastor who walks and talks in both worlds with ease. It wasn't until afterward that I discovered why. Walter received his BA in philosophy and history from Northwestern University, his MDiv from Regent College in Vancouver, and his PhD in Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations from Harvard. He's not only smart, but he's a pastor who gets it. And after pastoring for decades at Park Street Church and other congregations in Vancouver and Charlottesville, Virginia, in addition to serving as campus chaplain at Yale, Walter answered the call to serve as president of the National Association of Evangelicals in January of 2020, after having spent 7 years on the board of directors. At the NAE, he and his team strive to make the organization's members more effective in influencing American society to seek justice and righteousness, and in doing so, make the collective evangelical voice more effective in living out the kingdom of God and bringing more to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And Walter is notably the NAE's first person of color to lead the organization. In conjunction with his work at the NAE, Walter preaches, he teaches, he writes, and engages in collaborative leadership to connect the Bible to the intellectual and cultural issues of the day. And he leverages his position at the NAE and strives to address faith concerns with elected officials and public institutions, and provides theological and cultural commentary to leading news outlets. And Walter's background makes him the perfect respondent to Francis. So welcome, Walter, and thank you and the NAE for co-sponsoring tonight's event.
Don't worry, I'm not going to preach a sermon at this hour. But I do want to express my gratitude, Dr. Collins Francis, both for what you have done professionally, but also personally in my life, as a friend, as a model of integrity, intellectually, spiritually, but also socially. As a pastor, I say thank you. Having served in Boston for many years, I could predict the cycle of what would happen during an academic year. Students would roll in, and the traffic would be miserable from mid-August to mid-September. Churches would get their programs rolling, and then somewhere about the second half of October to the beginning of November, I could plan on starting to have conversations with one of the myriads of students in the myriads of schools, and it would often go like this. I grew up in a Christian household, and I'm at this school now, and I'm learning things that are unsettling to my faith, and I don't know how to put the pieces together, or even if they can be put together ever again. Invariably, one of the gifts that I was able to give is, there's a book that I think might be helpful for you. It's called The Language of God. So thank you for offering that as a pastor's toolbox. It's immensely helpful. Of course, in my position right now as president of the NAE, I also say thank you for the contributions that you've made to human flourishing. We know that for you, it is in the name of Jesus, but it is given without discrimination and without regard for your own reputation, except for the fact that as a follower of Jesus, you want to do good in this world in his name. So thank you on that regard as well. Truth, science, faith, trust. Time does not permit, the hour does not permit for a robust response. And frankly, what am I going to say in response to your presentation? I do want to distill something in a particularly evangelical way, because one of the things that I feel in the discourse is that we have not translated the language of these types of discourse into the language that many in our churches understand. What is a particularly evangelical kind of way to imbibe and to, in fact, disciple this kind of information? Francis, you've given me a little bit of a segue, so I'm going to read from the beginning of the book of Proverbs as a sight passage and just provide a quick reflection on that and conclude with an illustration. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right, just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance for the understanding of proverbs and parables, sayings, and the riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. All of that, truth, and I will contend, science, faith, trust, right there in Scripture. It is not something that you've just invented in order to publish a book. It is something that the book invented and codified. You see, this is not only revealed special knowledge from the Lord given to Solomon, this is a model of how Solomon combined the special faith that comes as the people of God and revelation given to him by the Spirit with the commonly available grace given to humanity. The book of Proverbs isn't unique in the ancient world. The instructions of Shurapuk, the Akkadian Council of Wisdom, all predate the book of Proverbs and has very similar beginnings. In fact, it's not only the form of Proverbs, it's the content. There's this whole section in the middle of Proverbs, the 30 sayings, that actually weren't invented by Solomon. He is quoting the wisdom of Amenhotep, an Egyptian pharaoh that predates Solomon by centuries. He also quotes the sayings of Agur, the sayings of the king of Lemuel. It seems that Solomon and Scripture is perfectly comfortable with truth wherever it may be found. The distribution of God's grace and wisdom wherever it may be found. And it's not something for a commentator to write about in reading the Scriptures and trying to cohere that with other sources of information. It is right there in the Scriptures. Bringing it all together, this seamless interweaving of the special revelation of God for the community of faith, the wisdom of God given to humanity more generally. In the ancient world, they didn't have science the way that we would understand it, but there is the science of observation that formed wisdom literature. Truth, right there in the community context that the people of God were supposed to be pursuing. We, I think, need a more robust form of discipleship in our churches. Francis, thank you for challenging us, pointing us in that direction, prodding us and wooing us toward that more robust discipleship. I call it a catechesis of complexity. Too often in our churches, we give a flannel graph Jesus, when the world cannot be explained with such simplicity. I think of my son recently, a few years ago, graduated from high school. He needed to learn calculus, write complex arguments about worlds and U.S. history, biology, social science, economics. All had to learn those basic things as an 18-year-old. What is it that our churches expect our 18-year-olds to understand about faith, truth, scriptures, its context, its richness? What I would hope is a replication of the DNA that we find here. A boldness to consider the complexity of the world, a curiosity that recognizes that God has made it all, and the sources of knowledge are available to us by His grace, but also a deep compassion to give each other space to learn. Again, thank you for modeling this and encouraging this, and using this leg of your life, this lap that God has given to you in service to not only the church, but to our country more broadly.
So, Francis, I think part of the problem that I see is people wanting, friends and relatives wanting political power, wanting to turn back the clock on various things so they are enamored with the political power they can have. How do we convince them that we're all pilgrims here, that we're exiles in Babylon, that we don't need that political power?
If we're talking about friends that are Christians, I think we've got the perfect text to stand upon, which somehow has maybe gotten pushed aside and been replaced by other messages that are less noble and more likely to inspire fear and a sense of being disregarded or even insulted. For those who are not Christians, it's a lot harder, because what are you going to appeal to? But I do think, remember those 7 pillars, I think we all still do believe in such things as freedom and love and beauty and goodness, and trying to find a way to get back to that foundation. It's going to be really tough, and that's going to take a long conversation, not just 15 minutes over coffee. But I think the good news is we stand on a foundation of truth and love that is the answer, and we serve a God from which those messages came and have landed clearly in our hearts. So we're on the right side of this difficult historical moment, but it's not going to be an easy one to turn around after we've gotten as far into the hole as we can. You're the preacher. Help me out here.
A couple of quick thoughts. One is to understand the why. Nature abhors a vacuum. There was a time where community, though individualistic as a society, our individualism in America still had a social context. And it mitigated the impact of rampant individualism. But when social context is attenuated, it's weakened, there's no check on that individualism. And so nature abhors a vacuum, social nature abhors a vacuum. And so in the place of the cohesion that used to exist, mediating institutions other than politics, there's nothing left for many. And so rushing toward the politics. I think the reversal would not be to try to denigrate politics head on or to convince other people that they're wrong in their pursuits. It is to expose them to other forms, other mediating institutions in society that can occupy and inspire their attention. Volunteer at a soup kitchen. Engage in dialogue with those within your communities. And I think in the end, that will reimagine what it means to be socially engaged. With that, you have inoculated the need to just rush to politics as the solution.
As a fellow Wolverine, a fellow clinician, a fellow musician, a fellow braver angel, and a person who came to faith later in life, I want to thank you for being a role model to a novice scientist and a novice Christian like me. But for others in the room who are not familiar with braver angels, can you describe our particularly harmonious conversation that you had with someone whose web of truth was radically different than yours?
Well, I've had a lot. I mentioned Wilkinson because that was the sort of first experience I had, and he actually did draw up his web of belief, and we compared them, and it was quite instructive for both of us to notice what were a few similarities, because he's a Christian, and what were radical differences about politics and public health. And again, the first time I met him, I thought, I'm never going to be able to stand being around this person for more than this one time when I'm supposed to. Because that's the reaction you have when somebody's coming at you with such strongly disagreeable perspectives. At least I thought they were disagreeable. He was just saying how he felt. But it helped that in Braver Angels, there's a moderator. And it's really important, therefore, that you don't start getting personal with attacks. You can say exactly what you think about an issue, but you're not supposed to be calling the other person stupid or evil. And they stop you quickly if you try to go there. But you really do have to listen. That's the other part of the moderation. This is like marriage counseling for the country. You have to listen so well that you can speak back to that person what you heard them say. And they have to say, yes, that's what I said. And that's quite a lot further than most of us would go. And then something happened that time, and it's happened in most of my Braver Angels gatherings, which are usually a dozen people, 6 on either side. Somebody will say, you know, as long as we're really being honest, I got to tell you, there's some things I've done that probably made this worse. That first admission that we all have kind of contributed to the polarization, and it isn't just the other people's fault. And that opens the floodgates, and people start to say, well, you know, I've been posting stuff on social media, and I know it got my cousin really mad, and then later I found out it wasn't true, and maybe I should be more careful about that. And after an hour or so, you come to the point where there's a question, okay, what do we all learn? Invariably, the answer is, we're not that far apart after all. That gives me great hope. If I knew how to scale that to the entire country, the entire world, then I think we'd be on the right path. That's the hard part. How do you scale that? Part of it is by getting lots of people engaged. So again, if you're inclined to join braverangels.org, this would be a great time to do that. Yes?
I'm a Canadian clinician, so a foreigner. But even though there's a lot around how individuals can act, we also know we serve a good and great God. I'm curious, how would you as Americans, all of you also, how can we pray for you? How, like sincerely, this is a very important year for you as a country, and it infects us too. How can we genuinely pray for you as brothers and sisters?
What a lovely question. Walter, I'm going to let you, as the pastor here, help us. How do we answer?
Pray James 1:19 for us. Brothers and sisters, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, because human anger does not achieve the righteousness of God. Pray this for the people of God that live in this country. I think once we get that posture, positions will take care of themselves.
James 1:19. Beautiful. Yes? Uh-oh. Oh, you're on.
Yeah. So Francis, back in March, you did a talk on the BioLogos podcast with Jonathan Haidt about his book. And then Haidt, being really known for being an atheist, shocked you by saying that like the solution to the rise in the mental health epidemic, which he attributed to the rise of smartphones and social media, was spiritual communities. So I guess like Pastor Walter, and then Francis, like both as a pastor and scientist respectively, how would you counter the unprecedented rise in self-harm, suicide, depression, and anxiety among our youth?
I appreciate you raising that. And this is a podcast through BioLogos that I had with Jonathan Haidt. And yeah, he's an atheist, but he was very clear that as he looks at the crisis of mental health in adolescents and in older people too, that a big part of that is the loss of a spiritual connection. And he grieves for that, even though he doesn't see it himself as anchored in truth. He sees it as a social good. Jonathan Rauch, who wrote that book called The Constitution of Knowledge, makes that same case. He used to be really an angry atheist 25 years ago. Now he runs a group that I'm part of on Thursdays for pastors and friends, even though he's still an atheist. But he sees the value, and I think somewhere God is working on Jonathan Rauch if he doesn't know it. So I think that's a really interesting observation, that just from purely social considerations, one of the reasons that our anchors seem to be so unsteady right now is because the influence of solid Christian faith, the catechesis that we've lost along the way, is causing a serious disconnect and causing us to be lonely and also to be in a circumstance of wondering about why we're here. Walter, you probably have comment also about that kind of observation, even coming from non-believers.
Yeah, this I think is an incredible moment for the witness of the church. Not only is it there in Scripture, but the science supports this, right? If you look at some of the research that's coming out of the Harvard Human Flourishing Project, the correlation between lowering deaths of despair with increasing church attendance is there to be seen. And the kind of social cohesion that occurs in communities of faith is extraordinarily well attested. And that just matches what God would say, that we should not forsake the assembling together, as is the habit of some. And so there is, I think, a moment that we could present Christianity afresh as a response to some of the deepest human needs out there.
I very much appreciate Dr. Kim that Solomon drew on many sources of wisdom which lay outside of, the called Jewish community, which, we traditionally think of God as working in. And I think that we have some very simplistic views throughout the evangelical church today and probably in other churches. One, I was trying to understand why some people think the way they do about politics, and I read somewhere that only a Christian can have any wisdom because he has the Holy Spirit, other people don't. Therefore, whenever there's an election, you should vote for the Christian because he'll have the Holy Spirit to guide him. We don't think about any other source, so nobody else can have any wisdom. And I love to recall Martin Luther, who said, "I'd rather be operated upon by a Turk who's a surgeon than by a Christian who's a butcher."
I'm getting the eye from the organizer here. Do you have a quick question?
Harzma. I was at Raleigh in April, and I think the last speaker from Wheaton College who talked about reading the Bible, he really had some points to bring up that I think we have a very weak view of Scripture in the church. We're out there looking for little proof verses to find our point for politics or whatever it is, rather than getting a rich, deep view of Scripture.
I'm sure.
I just think there's a lot to be done in the church.
There's a
at
lot.
Very basic levels.
I think that we would all agree. I think it's John Walton you're referring to, but Walter, this is right down your sweet spot. And what do we think? One more? Or call it? Okay, I think. But answer that question, and then we'll consider we have done the best we could with what were a lot of people still waiting. I know it's getting late.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to establish that I believe this scriptures are the inspired word of God, but God's inspiration encompasses the breadth of his creation.
Just always feels like at an occasion like this, people who love to sing as well as pray and think ought to get a chance to sing. And this is a hymn that I'm very fond of and may have even sung at a previous ASA meeting at some point. The tune is Hifredal, which is Love Divine, All Loves Excelling. Although I will tell you, when I walked into the Catholic Mass at 4:30 this afternoon over here in this amazing church that's right next door to us, and you got to walk in there if you haven't already, they were singing this same tune to a totally different set of words. Hallelujah. Sing for Jesus. Well, let's sing for Jesus. So these words here written by a pastor, but to that familiar tune, and you're going to help me by advancing the slides when I need that. Praise the source of faith and learning that has sparked and stoked the mind with a passion for discerning how the world has
What a wonderful day to end a wonderful evening and a wonderful day. Thank you so much, Francis. Francis was at our 2018 meeting at Gordon College, and he spoke at the public lecture, and this is how he ended our meeting, and we were all hoping that you would do it again tonight. So thank you very much. Francis is not only a valued member of the ASA, but a wonderful ambassador. He so generously gives of his time, his talent, and his treasure. And we're just grateful for everything that you've done tonight and over the years, Francis. And Walter, thank you to you as well. Walter was our Winter Symposium speaker last year, and the NAE has become a meaningful partner to the ASA. So we appreciate you being here tonight and again, co-sponsoring this event. Again, my name is Vicki Best, and I serve as the Executive Vice President for the ASA. And I want to acknowledge a few people in the audience tonight before we dismiss you. First of all, our ASA VIPs, those individuals who have been faithful members of our organization for 40 or more years. And in fact, I'd like to now acknowledge their combined 1,000 years of membership. So VIPs, would you please stand as I say your name and remain standing, and please hold your applause until everyone has been announced. Our one and only 60-plus year member in the audience tonight is John Richardson from Acton, Massachusetts. We can hold the applause till the end, please. Between 50 and 60 years, Paul Arvison from Rockville, Maryland. David Barnes from North Chile, New York. Dillard Ferris from Plain City, Ohio. Sid Niemeyer from Pleasanton, California. John Wood, ASA Director Emeritus from Edmonton, Alberta. Gordon Fish from Wilmington, Delaware. And now our 40 to 50 year members, we have Lynn Braband from Georgetown, Texas. Francis Collins from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Ted Davis from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Ron Hodges from Palo Alto, California. Randy Isaac, another ASA Director Emeritus from Magnolia, Massachusetts. Robert Kaida from Manalapan, New Jersey. Keith Miller, Morgantown, Pennsylvania. Stephen Mosier from St. Charles, Illinois. David Saunders, Raleigh, North Carolina. Bruce Schweitzer from Beverly, Massachusetts. Judy Taranchuk from Delta, British Columbia. Tim Wallace from Bedford, Massachusetts. And Kirk Wood from Abington, Pennsylvania. Now let's give them a round of applause.